During the Federal Convention, when slavery was a hot ticket option, what was actually transpiring? What decision was made before the Constitution was drafted?
On the issue of slavery, the decision was made of the Three-Fifths Compromise, where the slaves would be counted as 3/5 of a person. This benefited the southern states because they had representation of their slaves, and this benefited the northern states because they could tax the southern states for 3/5 of a person.
This compromise is located in the Constitution in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. Another compromise based on the slavery issue was the importation of the slave trades outlined in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1, which prohibited the regulation of the slave trade until 1808.
Thank you. Okay.
Can we talk about the campaign for ratification and particularly the publication of what we would today call op-ed pieces arguing for and against ratification? As I'm sure you know, they were done using pseudonyms, anonymously in effect. First of all, why do you think the authors of those pieces used pseudonyms, and do you think it was fair that they did so?
They used pseudonyms to protect their identity from persuading people's opinions. So people would not be persuaded on this person's social status and more on his actual views.
I would absolutely agree that this is fair, and this is even more fair than using their real name because the politicians didn't have to fear the implications on their political career, so they could really state the truth and the true arguments and how they felt about it, which is giving even more honesty directly to the people.
Isn't it important to assess an author's motives in considering their views?
It is important to address an author's motives when considering the views, but I think if you read these pieces, not so much who wrote them is what matters, but what they say. By reading, for example, the Federalist Papers or the Brutus and Cato Papers, you can clearly see which side of the debates they fell on. And so by using pseudonyms, they allowed for just the issues to be addressed and not which politicians or which well-known figures would persuade which people.
And their purpose their purpose was completely stated. They called themselves the Federalist Papers. They wanted ratification of the Constitution, and the federal farmer did not.
Why do you think that the framers sent the Constitution to states with neither an endorsement nor a condemnation? Was this a wise decision? Why? Why not?
I believe that they sent him directly to the states saying nothing because the actual purpose of the Philadelphia Convention was not to completely make a new constitution. In fact, it was to amend the Articles of Confederation. And so by sending the Constitution directly to the states, it was kind of saying to the states, well, you can approve of this being ratified or not.
However, it can be implied that by sending it to the states, this is an implicit endorsement of the Constitution. Many of the Anti-Federalists argue that the Confederation Congress should rewrite the Constitution or look at it and make amendments to the Articles. And by sending it to the states, it was an implicit endorsement. And I believe that it was a good idea because it showed the people that they should be re-examining their government.
How was the precedent of ratifying the Constitution by conventions carried along when amendments were proposed? We had 27 amendments that have been adopted. How many were adopted by conventions? How many adopted by state legislatures, and why?
The majority of the constitutional amendments have been adopted by state legislatures. One example of an amendment being adopted by a ratifying convention is the 17th Amendment, which was held through popular ratification in 1917.
And the first 10 amendments of our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, were actually adopted during the ratification of the Constitution. It was kind of a compromise between the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists.
Why were the small states like Delaware eager to have their ratification conventions approve the Constitution?
These states were eager to have their their states ratify because they were awarded more power in the national government by allowing them to have an equal voice in the Senate with other states, with other larger states. They were eager to make sure that their rights were protected.
Also, by targeting the smaller states, this was a Federalist tactic. They wanted to build momentum to so they could get the ratification of the larger states, and they wanted to build momentum so that they could get 9 of the 13 states to ratify.
Can you give any other examples of the where in line the states in terms of their ratification were as examples of the political strategy or the effect of the order of ratification on the result?
Well, New York and Virginia hadn't ratified by the time the 9 states that were necessary under Article 7 had ratified, and the Federalists knew that they couldn't effectively have a government, both geographically and in terms of population and power, without these 2 states. So the Federalists kept pushing for ratification from these 2 very important states.
Why didn't they ratify earlier then?
The Constitution was very controversial in both of these states. Virginia in particular had strong anti-Federalist oppositions with Patrick Henry and other people who were vehemently opposed to the Constitution. George Mason is another example who actually left the Constitutional Convention because he was so against the ideas set forth in the Constitution. So these states there were large anti-Federalist populations in these states, and so ratification was postponed, or ratification conventions were postponed because there were so many anti-Federalists.
And the state of Rhode Island was actually a state that did not attend the Constitutional Convention, and it wasn't until George Washington actually refused to tour the state of Rhode Island because it had not attended this Constitution and ratified.
Also, Massachusetts, which was one of the later of the 9 necessary states to ratify, at the Massachusetts Constitutional Convention, the Anti-Federalists and Federalists struck a deal where the Federalists promised to discuss the addition of the Bill of Rights, what we now know as the Bill of Rights, to the Constitution, and this was a key aspect in getting many of the later states to ratify, but that didn't happen until later of the 9 states.